This is the first in a series of 4 videos devoted to the how-to of installing the nozzle circuit. After all, the misting units come with instructions and an operating manual. The nozzle circuit doesn't, and this is our way of providing one. You should have already viewed the video 3.1 where we introduced the nozzle circuit components, as well as the videos in Course 4 where we outlined a process to follow when designing a nozzle circuit and then step through an example. But that's all theory, and it's time to get hands-on. We gathered the content for this series directly from a large number of MistAway dealers who generously contributed ideas, techniques, and tips they have developed collectively over many years and thousands of installations. For that, we thank them. As you'll see throughout the series, we'll present options because there is rarely 100% consensus on the best way of doing some things or the best tool to use. You might expect that since the contributing dealers all develop their methods independently and work in different parts of the U.S., spanning a wide variety of property layouts and installation surface types. So while you will undoubtedly benefit from what they've learned through experience, as you gain your own experience, you'll develop your very own methods to best fit the properties you'll work in. As we interviewed our contributing dealers and distilled what we heard, a few rules and ideas emerged for which there was near universal agreement that they were important. We've organized those ideas into 5 universal truths. In the design guidelines that we presented in Section 4, we addressed nozzle placement. Our first universal truth also addresses nozzle placement, but comes at it from a different angle. Consider the service consequences of every nozzle you install. At some point during its life, almost every nozzle tip on the circuit will need to be cleaned or replaced because it is not performing as it should. How often is primarily a function of the insecticide that is used and how it interacts with the water that dilutes it. So before you make a final decision about where to place a given nozzle, think about how you'll access it to replace the tip. For example, in order to install a nozzle on the back side of a fence, you'll need access to the neighbor's property, and depending on how it's installed, it might take 2 people. Before you do it, think about whether you want to do that again when you have to replace the nozzle tip. There might be another installation technique that's easier to service. Or, before you put that nozzle 15 feet up on an eave or ceiling over a travertine patio, think about having to service that nozzle and the ladder you'll need to schlep around if it begins to drip on the patio floor. Keep nozzles, fittings, and tubing clean during installation. The orifice on the nozzle is 12 thousandths of an inch in diameter, so it doesn't take much dirt in the lines to plug a nozzle. If you introduce dirt into the nozzle circuit while putting it together, you'll foul the nozzles when you pressure up for the first time, which I think you'll agree is not a good way to start. There are a number of steps you can take to avoid this problem. Wear a tool belt with pouches to hold fittings during the installation. Blow through the fittings before you install them. Use the coupling with a plug in it as you're working with the tubing to keep it dirt-free. Before you pressure up for inspection, remove the terminal nozzle on the circuit and flush the lines. Our next truth addresses working with the tubing and fittings. Push in, then pull out to leave no doubt. When making a connection to a push-to-connect fitting, it is very important to make sure the tubing end slides beyond the O-ring in the fitting and that the collet grabs the tubing. So to ensure good connections, first make a clean perpendicular cut on the tubing using a tube cutter like this one, and make sure the blades are sharp. Second, push in, then pull out and leave no doubt. Insert the tubing into the port until it is pushed in as far as it can go. Then just to be sure it's secure, push it in just a little more and pull on it. Our next truth addresses the span of tubing between fittings. Stretch the tubing taut, but not tight. As we described in video 3.1, the tubing used in our systems is extruded nylon. We use it because it cost-effectively meets the flow and pressure requirements of the systems, and it's durable, standing up well to sunlight and seasonal temperature swings without wilting, sagging, or cracking. But over several seasons, it can shrink slightly. When it does, if it's stretched too tight, it can pull itself out of the push-to-connect fittings, resulting in leaks. To avoid this problem, pull the tubing taut, and then use clamps or staples every 2 to 3 feet to keep the installation clean and prevent it from sagging. When the tubing shrinks, it will just tighten up rather than pulling loose from the fittings. Our final universal truth addresses tubing kinks. Kinks in the nozzle circuit cause pressure drop problems while misting and pressure relief problems and dripping nozzles on shutdown. To avoid installing a kink, make sure to either use elbows for turns in the nozzle circuit, which creates a clean, finished look, or gentle arcs, like so. And because our nylon tubing has what is called memory, if you accidentally kink the tubing while working with it, it won't recover. That's why we say don't kink, and if you do, cut, and do it over. So that's it for this video, 5 simple but universal truths of nozzle installation. Upon reflection, they probably all seem pretty obvious, but aren't you glad that someone else and not you had to learn them the hard way? In the next video, we're going to present a list of the top tools our contributing dealers wouldn't go to an installation without.